is only few. Since I don't have a Bible in English, so let me open the Bible in English, and I just quote from one line from the Gospel of Luke. Just be patient. Do you hear me down there? You hear me? Good. Here's the one line from the Gospel of Luke. Because of the sound here, the echo here, so I try to speak as slowly as I can. Okay, hopefully you can pick up all. The story is after Jesus had lost in the temple in Jerusalem, and at that time his parents found him. Then he returned to Nazareth with his parents. And the Gospel of Luke writes this. Jesus went out with parents and came to Nazareth. And he was obedient to them. And his mother kept all these things in her heart. And Jesus advanced in wisdom and age, and favored before God and men. Okay. Luke's gospel is very clear. Jesus returned to Nazareth with his parents, and he was obedient to them, and he was advanced in wisdom and favor in God's eyes. Today, when I talk to you young people, actually I talk to I asked Gatti who is the audience at this time. Không biết là giới trẻ hay là giới già. And I'm not sure what language I want to speak. Either is fine with me. But I know that's not only the language, but it carries the ideas or the thought that I want to pass on to you. But I know that when I speak, of course, when I go to teach in the university, of course I speak English. But I know that even when I speak English, not only the thought that it carried out, but also the way I express it is a little different. Simply because when I speak English, I just wear on my own the mind of the American, because I'm very much living here more than 30 years, long enough that I've become Americanized a little bit. And when I speak Vietnamese, I'm very Vietnamese myself. But those who your parents understand exactly what I'm trying to say. But the topic I want to pick today is obedience is more important than sacrifice. And this is a line in the book of Samuel. In the book of Samuel, chapter 15, after God put Saul to be the first king of the Israelites, in the first few years, he obeyed God, and he tried to do everything according to God's will. But by the end of his time, because his ego was so big, and he wanted to control everything to the point that he even opposed the advice of prophets to go against God's will. So when he invaded another part of the land that God allowed them to go, the instruction is very clear from the prophets. Don't take anything from that land. In other words, don't steal anything. But because of Saul, the king, he saw a lot of gold and money and a lot of things, jewels. So he wanted to steal it. And he has a reason. The reason is, if I take these jewels, if I take these cattle, cows, buffaloes, goats, then I bring it back to offer to you, God. In other words, I steal it, but I steal it in your name. I steal it so I come back and offer the sacrifice to you. And in chapter 15, this is what God says to King Saul in the book of the first of Samuel. Samuel is a prophet. Samuel said to King Saul, does the Lord so delight in holocausts and sacrifices as in obedience to the command of the Lord? Does the Lord favor sacrifice over obedience? Obedience is better than sacrifice. And submission. What is that? Is the microphone? Oh. Obedience is better than sacrifice, and submission than the fat of the goat. Obedience is better than sacrifice. Now, we can learn something from the story of King Saul. First, obedience is God's will. Now, many of you young, and I know that when we are talking about obedience, I don't think you understand exactly what I want to say. I don't want you to be just only to obey blindly, because that is another form of stupidity. But at the same time, in your age, you're too young to know. And you have to admit that you're too young to know, therefore, a lot of things that your parents, grandparents, they have learned and they know more. If I tell you, or for example, if I ask you, what is the definition of freedom? Free, being free. I think most of you will give me the answer. Free means to do whatever you want. Is it right? What is the freedom according to you, this young man? What is the freedom according to you? If I ask you to define what is the freedom, what do you say? Getting to do what you want. That is absolutely wrong. But that's how they understand. Let me say in Vietnamese. Nếu mà tôi hỏi anh chị em tự do là gì, thì anh chị em sẽ nói tự do là làm những điều gì mình muốn. Nhưng đây là một câu trả lời hoàn toàn sai. Bởi vì nếu trường hợp tự do là làm những điều gì mình muốn, thì đó người ta gọi là hỗn loạn chứ không phải là tự do. Tự do là làm những gì mà luật pháp cho phép. By definition, it means freedom is to do what the law allows you to do. Because if you want to do whatever you want to do, it's a chaos. It's not freedom. So in this land, as well as in many different lands, when we're talking about freedom, we mean that we do whatever the law allows us to do. If you go to a freeway, you want people to obey the law. Because if not, it's a chaos. Obedience is very much in the same tone. Any of you here learn piano? Raise your hand. Good. Good. Any of you here learn violin? Any kind of musical instrument? Good. Now, you know that you learn piano. You know that in the first few days when your teacher asks you to do, They tell you the thumb is A and the ring finger is B. You have to follow. It's very difficult. You don't want it. You want to use only 2 fingers, which is a lot of adults do it. Huh? When we learn how to type, we type only 2 fingers, 1, 2, and the rest of our life, we cannot type fast. But when you guys, very young like this, when you begin to learn piano, you learn with the very discipline and law, regulation. This is a discipline. This finger, this E, this finger, this E, this finger, and you have to learn how to function 5 fingers, not 1. It's very, very difficult first. And that's why I know a lot of adults like us, we don't play piano because we don't want to keep ourselves in that kind of discipline. But then after a few years, how long have you been learning piano? 4 years, good. So by this time, what's your name? Andy? I believe that by this time, Andy can play piano without following the rules. Why? Because at this time, he's the professional enough that when he sitting at the piano, he just play. And he never pay attention to this finger, this one. But at the very beginning, he did. Am I right? Law or regulation only to help you in the very beginning. But after you get into it, you don't even remember it. Because it becomes part of your nature, and now when you type, like a piano, or when you play piano or play the violin, you don't remember anymore, but you play so well, so smoothly. But all begins with the discipline or the law that you put your finger in each keyboard. What is the point I want to tell you? Obedience is a form of discipline. Obedience is part of the regulation in the family and in society. But it means only temporarily. It means only for you when you're young and foolish, sometimes when you don't know much. And that's why you listen to the elderly, your parents, your grandparents, or adults in the parish. But when you grow and mature enough, when you know what to do, then we don't need you to obey, but you automatically obey simply because that is the right thing to do. When you first begin to learn piano, you learn how to put this finger in this hand and you practice for a week or a month. But by now, if we give you a song, you step in and boom, you play. Because the discipline, the law, the regulation becomes a part of your nature and you don't pay attention anymore. When you are young like this boy, how old are you, con? Mấy tuổi? Ủa đâu là con? Lên con đi nào? Thằng này nó 9 tuổi thiếu sức rồi con ơi. Về bán nhà ăn con nhé, con coi chờ 4 buổi đi cũng được. 9 tuổi thật đó hả? Are you 9? Oh my God! Okay, 9. Khi mà con còn 3 tuổi, when you are 3 years old, maybe 2 years old, 3 years old, your parents ask you, what's your name, con? Nam, huh? Okay. So when you are 2 years old, your parents teach you. When somebody gives you a gift, what do you say, Nam?
Thank you.
Thank you. And sometimes you forget. And when you forget, mom and dad say, thank you. Am I right? Good. You obey them. Why? Because you don't know. They know that if somebody gives you a gift, then you say thank you. But now you're 9 years old. They don't remind you anymore. If somebody gives you something, automatically, now like Andy here, is Andy right? Yeah. Andy or Nami. If somebody gives you some gift, automatically you say thank you. Why? Because that is the right thing to do. Not because your parents ask you to obey, say thank you. but you say it because it is the right thing to do. Therefore, I want you to learn how to obey your parents at this age, simply because, first of all, obedience is God's will. What I mean is this: God gave you a very good family, parents, good mom, good dad, good uncles, grandparents, and these people around to teach you what you don't know. And I use an example of piano, because at a certain age, when you know enough, they will not teach you anymore. And by that time, you don't have to obey them to say thank you. But by that time, you say thank you simply because it is the right thing to do. They ask you to go to Mass on Sunday, simply because some of you don't see why. It's not important, Mom. Look at my friends. They don't go to church ever. And they're still alive, and they're still good. And their family's still rich. But then when you go home, Mom and Dad said, I don't care. You have to go to church. You have to join ﷺ. And you resist. Why? Because you don't know. But at a certain age, you will go and join the ﷺ, and you go to church. Not because you obey them, but because this is the right thing to do. What about disobedience? Again, at your age, you don't even know. Like I asked you a definition of freedom. What's the freedom mean to you? Freedom means do whatever I want. But absolutely it's wrong, because if that is a definition of freedom in this world, then we kill each other. You cannot even drive the car on the street. But if freedom is to do whatever the law allows you to do, then at least there's some kind of order that we want to live in. Then what happens when we disobey? Very simple. Nam, con qua Mỹ mấy năm rồi, mày có vẻ nói tiếng Việt giỏi nè. Ủa, 1 năm rưỡi hàng gì nó nói tiếng Việt rõ, tôi đoán mà cái này á. Nói tiếng Việt rõ ràng là tiếng này phải để đây rồi. Con tiếng Việt 1 năm rưỡi. Vậy con có biết là ông A Dông bà Eva phạm cái tội gì không? Ông A Dông với bà Eva có đạo hả? Ok. Họ ở wrong người rồi. And what happened to Adam and Eve, Andy? What happened to them? What sins did they commit? Of course, they ate an apple, but what kind of sin is that? Eating is a sin. But what kind of sin that they committed? That's it. See, I'm talking. God told them, you can eat anything in the garden except this tree. They disobeyed. But that is not the point. The point I want to tell you is that disobedience can bring a series of consequences. Because when Adam and Eve disobey, look at how we accept or suffer the consequence today. Sometimes disobedience carries the whole series of destruction. A lot of people begin with something very simple. I mean, I'm talking about young people today. Mom and Dad tell them you have to come back before the curfew in the family, 9 or 10 p.m. First, they just no. And they begin with something very simple. They break the curfew. After the curfew, they begin to smoke a little marijuana. After marijuana, maybe something. And the consequence, a series of that. At the end, maybe they end up in jail. My point is, disobedience, it's never alone in one action. It always carries the whole series of it. Therefore, all of you young and do not know much, at least you have to admit to yourself that I don't know much. And since I don't know much, then I should listen to those who know much more. Now, Here's a lot. Toàn là người già cũng đâu thấy trẻ đâu. Khách này là khách già đấy, phải khách trẻ đâu, nhưng mà có hai cô này trẻ hơn, có vẻ hơi ngại một chút. Ok, sợ rồi, bắt đầu thấy tới sợ rồi. What's the difference between intelligence and wisdom? You don't know. What about you? What's the difference between intelligence and wisdom? No? Okay, too shy. Sao mà chỉ bên này bên kia vậy? Đưa cái máy cho mình. What's the difference between who's Anna? Okay, Anna here. Anna, what's the difference between intelligence and wisdom?
Because wisdom comes with experience and age.
Say it again.
Wisdom comes with age.
And what about intelligence?
You just know it because.
Okay, I know you're right there, so I don't want to push you to the corner. Now, we need to know the difference between intelligence and wisdom. And Anna was absolutely correct. Give her a big hand then. Wisdom comes with age. Intelligence is a gift. Ability to analyze things in a quick time. If I ask you, what about 2 and 2? 2 and 2 are? Make the mathematics now. 2 and 2? 4. 4 and 4? 4 and 4? 8 and 8? That we call intelligence. That means we can analyze things in a very quick time, fast. But that has nothing to do with life. Life is when you have experience with people in reality, collected, and then you know how to deal with them when some tensions or conflicts occur. That's why Anna is very correct. In the book of wisdom, it tells us wisdom comes with age. The older, the wiser they are. And that's why we listen to our parents and our grandparents. Not because they are intelligent. They're not. You are much more intelligent. You can solve the problem in a second, but you don't know how to live. They may be stupid, but they're wise because of the experience of life in their own life, rich enough to tell you how to deal with it when tension and conflict occurs. So in our life, obedience is a sign of humility and recognizing our limitation. In Vietnamese we say, trẻ thì ăn trộn gà, già thì ăn trộn trâu. Có hiểu câu đó không? Mấy đứa nói tiếng Anh. Anna có hiểu không? Trẻ ăn trộn gà, già ăn trộn trâu. Okay. That means something you can begin with very small, but it ends up big, simply because that is a habit. It is a routine. Remember, obedience and disobedience, both. It does not affect only yourself. It affects everybody around you, in your family, in your community. In other words, if you obey, you can bring a lot of good things to your community, to your family, to your class. But if you disobey, the opposite consequence also happens. The Vietnamese, with Vietnamese, our family, especially with young people, our family is considered as the center of our life, not our own life. In this world, in this culture, in American culture and the European culture, individualism is worshipped. Not in Vietnamese culture, where we put our family as the center of our life. And we put our family above our own individual rights. That's why we say, một con ngựa đau thì cả tàu chê cỏ. Có hiểu không? Anna có hiểu câu đó không? Một con ngựa đau thì cả tàu chê cỏ. Hiểu không? Okay, then I give you another idiom in English you may understand. One bad apple can spoil the bunch. Understand it? Yes, one bad apple can spoil the bunch. Một con ngựa đau cả tàu, cái này không có dịch ra được, cái này phải học hai thứ tiếng khác nhau chứ mà dịch ra là chết. Cô không biết dịch ra một con ngựa đau cả tàu dây cỏ thì sao nữa. One bad apple can spoil a bunch. Because of either you obey or you disobey. It always brings some consequence to the family, to all of us. But in our culture, I grew up with the culture that your parents grew up, or your grandparents grew up. And that culture we call the culture of obedience. Because of when I was young, I walked into my class, the first thing it bumped into my eyes was the line, tiên học lễ, hậu học văn, đúng không? Và lớn rồi nha. First, learn how to behave. Then, you learn academic stuff. First, learn how to behave. Tiên học lễ, hậu học văn, learn virtues. Then you learn academic stuff. And that is the culture I grew up. In this country, no, not at all. But what we want to point out is, at young age, you very often think that you know everything. And then when you grow up, you realize that many things that you think you know, it was wrong. 2,300 years ago, one very smart and wise man, his name is Confucius. Have you heard his name? Confucius, you have heard of him? He's a Chinese philosopher. Okay? Confucius, he's the head of one we call religion, Confucianism. You've heard that before? No? Có biết đạo Phật không? Confucianism, heard that before? Yeah, that his name is Confucius. Okay? Confucius là ông Khổng Tử đó, là ông đẻ ra cái đạo Khổng đó. Thì cách đây 2.300 năm, học trò của ông tới hỏi ông, his disciples come to ask him, because they argue, they try to debate. They ask, the question is, at what time of the day the sun is closer to the earth? Now, I challenge young people like Andy and Anna. Think about 2,300 years ago. We don't have a science and we don't have a airplane to fly around to know that the earth is round. So forget that. The earth for them is flat. And then they don't know that up there is the moon, the sun. Forget that. But the question came up 2,300 years ago. When, during the time of the day, is the closest distance between the sun and the earth? Học trò của Khổng Tử hỏi ông Khổng Tử cái thời kỳ đó là thưa ngài, lúc nào ở trong một ngày đó, thì mặt trời nó gần trái đất nhất? Very difficult answer. He is extremely smart, extremely wise. Guess what his answer is? Exactly, that's what he said. I don't know. Because the two of them give reason. And both of them have good reason that they think they are right. The one said that early in the morning, the sun is closer to the earth. Why? He said, because it looks bigger. Perfect. Perfect reason, logic. Because when it's closer, then it's bigger. The other disciple, the other student said, no, it's in the noontime. They asked why? He said, because it's hotter. It's closer, that's why it's hotter. I give you the reason to tell you that both of them are wrong, and both of them are right at the same time. And their teacher, which is Confucius, who's extremely smart and wise, did not know how to say it, because based on logic alone, both of them have reason to say why they are right. But of course we know, at the end, of course sometimes they're not right or wrong. Both of them can be wrong, both of them can be right. It depends on when in the universe, when the sun moves around, maybe closer at this time or the other time it's farther. Now we know science. But that happened to young people. Because many young people think that if we know the answer of one thing, then absolutely we are right. And that is a disaster right now for all people. As coming to obey your parents, what is I have to say, weakness? Weakness in the Vietnamese culture. In Vietnamese culture, we teach you to obey, and sometimes we don't explain much. So some of you become very passive. You just obey without even questioning. And because of that, when you obey, frustration and tension build up. And that is a bad sign. I strongly recommend you do not do that. Of course, I teach you and I beg you to obey your parents, but I ask you to obey in a very intelligent way, in a very scientific and logic way. That means when your parents teach you something not in science, and not in other things about mathematics or literature, but if they teach you anything in moral, in virtues, in behavior and life, please listen to them. Why? Because I can guarantee you 99.9% they are right and you're wrong. Since you're too young, and you think that if I know the answer of science, then I know the answer of everything. And that is what happened to the disciples of Confucius. When the question comes up, when is the sun closer to the earth? Morning or noon? Both of them have reason, and it seems like a reason very logical. So I don't ask you to just obey blindly, because if you obey blindly, the weakness of that is you guys will build up some frustration and tensions, and to the point that you will react violently. That means at a certain age, I'm talking about 15, 16, 17, you will just ignore your parents, and that is such a failure. But I ask, if anything, not science, not mathematics, not literature, then at least when in regard to moral virtues, life experience, please listen to them and obey. Simply, I guarantee you, they are wiser than you are. What about the difference between disobedience and obedience that you think you know well? That is another failures of this culture. I'm talking about European and American culture. European and American culture try to promote your own independence, which is good. Autonomy always gives you some opportunity to be mature. But at the same time, if you want to be mature or you want to be autonomous, before you can be autonomous, then you will die. In other words, you see the young boy or young kid, they learn how to walk. And during the time they learn how to walk, they fail many times. And that's why when they begin to learn how to walk, when they're like 18 months, parents or adults always around them, not to stop them, not to help them by just only put them there and then always hold their hands to walk. But they are there to observe and to care. In case they fall, they will kind of support them. And after the adults or parents, always there to care for these kids, after they fail a few times, they learn how to walk and they walk successfully. The same thing with some of you want to be autonomous, to be independent. And you think that you don't need to listen to anyone because you know the answer. Of course, we respect that. But it takes time. We respect that when you are 30, 40 years old, or at least when you have a good experience in life, that it can tell you that this is better than the other. But when you are only 15, 16, 17, even 18, 20 years old, we know for sure you want to walk. But if you are not ready for it, you will fail. And that's why we do not allow you to be independent when you are not ready. The conflict and tension arose when you think you know everything, and when your parents know, not only think, but when your parents know you're not. Today, we look at the sample, or the example, the model of Jesus. Jesus, of course, he's a God and man, okay? God and man. And I believe Jesus is very smart, no question about that. Because at the age of 12, I don't know any of you at the age of 12 can sit down and debate and discuss with doctors of philosophies and religions. How old are you now, Andy? Andy, how old are you? 17. So you dare to discuss with me some issue like the issues of Bible or something with a doctor like me? Maybe not. But Jesus, at 12 years old, he sit down and talk to doctors and professors of laws. That means he's very smart. You agree? And the Bible tells us so. So I believe Jesus is very smart. But what happened is, after we returned back to Nazareth, I shared with you the line from Luke's Gospel. He obeys his parents. He's smart, but he's not wise. Why? He's only 12 years old. He can know a lot of things. And of course he's smart, intelligent, but he's not wise enough. And that's why when he returned to Nazareth, he obeys his parents. The same thing that I want to share with you all. At this age, you have many questions, and I know many of the questions that you think you know the answer. Not only that, your answers or your friends' answers they give to you seems very logical, seems very convincing, and that's why you think you hold the truth. Please be humble. Please understand that your parents probably know better. I'm not talking about science or literature or something else. I'm talking about virtues, moralities, experience of life. And if we disobey, then what happened? We ignore everything else. We ignore even the advice of the adult. And we make ourselves the center of the universe. And whatever I say is the truth. The consequence will come when you go to work or when you go out to the society. You know, at home, sometimes parents love their children and they don't discipline that much. But when you go out to work, when you go to work with others in the society, in the social level, of course, if you do something wrong, they fire you. Obedience is so important that becomes part of the character of Christians. Any of you here in thiếu nhi thánh thể đưa tay qua, ai ở đây mà vào thiếu nhi thánh thể đưa tay? Mấy có đừng có phải cứ trời thiếu nhi thánh thể nó đâu có đi nghe đâu, phải thì trời ơi trưởng thiếu nhi đâu rồi? Ở đây thiếu nhi thánh thể thì có mấy người đó thôi đó hả? Trời ơi, thấy không? Tôi nói cái này đó, giảng cho thiếu nhi thánh thể nó đâu có thèm đâu. When you join thiếu nhi thánh thể, you learn how to work together. That is a part of discipline and obedience. When the leader tells you, line up, you do it. The statistic number shows, in life, those who know how to play a musical instrument or or you know those who know how to work with the team, later in life, they become more successful. Why? Because they know how to work as a team. Cái này tôi nói cho người lớn biết thôi. Xã hội thì nó chứng minh những đứa nhỏ khi nó ở trong trường học, nó chơi đờn, nó chơi trong một ban nhạc, nó chơi chung trong một đội banh, thì thường những đứa này sau này lớn lên nó thành công nhiều hơn. Lý do tại sao? Thưa bởi vì ngay từ nhỏ nó đã biết tự kỷ luật mình để hòa mình trong một đám đông làm việc. Chơi một ban nhạc không phải lúc nào mình muốn thổi là thổi, phải tới phiên mình mới thổi. Chơi trong một đội banh thì phải tới phiên mình mới đá. Cho nên ngay những cái đó tạo cho nó một cái kỷ luật, và chính cái kỷ luật đó điều mà chúng ta dùng kiểu là vâng phục vâng lời. Chính nhờ những điều đó mà sau này khi lớn lên nó ra đời nó dễ thành công hơn là những đứa từ nhỏ nó muốn làm gì nó làm, ở trong nhà cha mẹ không cấm cản được, muốn chơi là chơi, muốn nghỉ là nghỉ. It is much more fruitful and more successful if you learn how to obey. So let me conclude with this, and if you have any questions, because I don't want to make it too last too long. Today, I just want to speak very simple issue with you, obedience. And I say that obedience is God's will. God's will here, I don't mean you just go home and say, whatever mom and dad say, you say, yes, that's obedience. That's not what I mean. Not what I mean. The topic of obedience is much more theological. It's much deeper than what you think. When I use the word obedience, I mean that you submit yourself to the adults, to your parents and grandparents, when you recognize a few things. Number one, you know that you're still young and you don't know everything. That's a sign of humility. Number two, you know that your parents and grandparents and all adults, they know much more because of their life, not because of their intelligence. And number three, you know that at this time, if I obey them, then later I can test my action. In other words, today I just obey and do it. But then I'm only 15, 17, 18 years old. I still have another 80 years to test out what I obey them today. In other words, let's see in 10 years from now, what I obey them, is it correct or not? They tell me, go to church every week. I don't like it. Why? Because of my friends next door, they never go to church and they're still fine. But anyway, since I know my limitation, I don't know much. Since I know that my grandpa, grandma now, they're old, they were ready to die, but they still go to church every week. Then my question to myself is, why they do that? Why do they go to church every week without failing any week? Is it necessary for them? And it seems like it that way. And if it is necessary for them, then maybe something I don't know. So at this moment, when they tell me go to church, I disagree, but I obey. Why? Because I still have another 80 years to test out my obedience. But at this time, I trust that they know much more than I do, and I trust that their advice is correct. In other words, when I pick the sign of Jesus, come to Nazareth and obey their parents, I want to remind you this. Obedience is the best gift you can ever give to your parents. And when you give gift to someone, please, wise enough, smart enough to give an appropriate gift. If I give the gift to my grand-niece and nephew, I give them some candies and cookies, and they love it. But if I give them an iPhone 12, they may throw it away. Simply, they're only 2 years old. But at your age, if I give you, I don't know, maybe an iPhone, you are so happy. But if I give you just only some cookies and candies, you laugh at me. because it's not appropriate. And when you are 40 years old, if I give you a house, maybe you appreciate more. So if I ask you, what do you think that the best gift you can give to your parents now? I don't want the answer. I want you to think about it. Then maybe you can think of, should I give them $1,000? Do you think they appreciate that? Or I can give them a car. Do you think they appreciate that? Or I obey them, just go to church and follow what they advise me at this moment. What do you think? In other words, if Jesus is smart enough, intelligent enough, and he returned to Nazareth and obeyed his parents, simply because that's God's will, simply because he's not mature enough, not wise enough, then it's the same to you. And I keep telling the same thing that I went to many different places, and I tell young people, I was born and grew up in the culture of obedience. Tiếng học lễ của Vâng. First, learn how to behave, learn virtues, then learn something else. And I believe if that culture for me, that culture forms me, that culture forms your parents and grandparents, and form me as a day, and I can guarantee you this. If you look at me now, and if you look at your parents and grandparents now, we might not be as intelligent as you are, but talking about culture and the character, if that culture, the culture of obedience, good enough to form me and to form your parents and grandparents, I believe that's good enough to form you too. You agree? Then just give a big hands and any questions? Any questions? Because I have to get on maybe a few more minutes. Okay, I'm a little disappointed because this is not young, but anyway, I think many of you, especially with parents, I appreciate parents present here with the children, and I don't want to use Vietnamese because I know some of them might not understand much. Có ai có câu hỏi gì không? Bây giờ thì hỏi tiếp việc được.
Thank you, Father Matthew. I guess one question on behalf of the students.
Okay.
Definitely, what if you see a lack of integrity in your parents? You're supposed to be obedient. What are the 3 things that we can do?
Sure. Very good question. What if you see in your parents some even lack of integrity? Or I can put it something else. What if you see in your parents something bad and evil? And not only that, I make it up, they liar, they bad, they cheat, and they tell me, be good. Should I obey? Here's the answer. Yes, obey them. And here I tell you about science. I'm not talking about something abstract. In science, they prove that by nature, each one of us has what we call conscience in our term of the religious term, conscience. Conscience, by definition, is the inner voice that tells you what is right and wrong. Now, some people have what we call the abnormal psychology or abnormal psyche, which is distorted, and that's why some parents even do something crazy. Either they kill their children, or they sell their children for monies, or they use their children as a means to make money. Some people like that. But that kind of people, 2 things happen. 1, very rare. Number 2, all these kinds of parents, after they put in jail, all of them went through the mental institute and checked it. And these people, I can tell you, they are not normal. In other words, don't treat the abnormal as the normal. So put them as a sick people. And because they are sick, they deserve our mercy and love more than condemnation. So these things happen. Some parents very bad, and even they use their children for money. But like I said, science and scientific proof, these people are not only abnormal, they're sick, and they deserve our love and mercy. No one intentionally use your parents for your money, except when you're sick. What about the regular parents? And here's the proof. Any person born on earth, somehow God creates individual, put in each one of us something we call conscience. And with that conscience, we know the difference between right and wrong. And to answer your question, if you have a time to read the Parent magazine, I guarantee you, even yourself, even your parents, even the evil mom and evil dad, even themselves, very bad, they kill. But they always want their parents, their children, the best. And that is the fact. I'm not saying that your parents would. I'm saying that listen to them. But because no one would tell, why don't you go and cheat? They don't teach you that. They teach you, don't lie. But they lie all the time. Even though they lie all the time, but deep down in their heart, they still want you to be a truthful person. And that is scientific research. All people, even bad parents, still dream and want their children to be good. So if the question is, should I listen to them? My answer is yes. Listen, because they want the best for you. Should I follow their examples? The answer is, of course, not. Because they might not be the good examples. But deep down in their conscience, they always want what's the best for you. Okay, so why don't we, so no more, right? Okay, one question. Oh, good. Wow, good boy.
What if your parents does something that you don't want them to do? What should you do?
Say it again, because the NASA can't hear you.
What if your parents do something that you don't want them to do? So what should you do?
If your parents ask you to do something you don't want to do?
No, if your parents do something that you don't want them to do.
If your parents do something that you don't want them to do, tell them. Tell them you don't want them to do.
They don't listen. Well, they don't listen.
Oh, then respect them. Because the two things can happen. Of course, sometimes they can be wrong. And I tell you that obedience is like a law. You apply the law how to learn as a brother, and then he learned how to play piano in the first few months. Finger number 1 and here number 2. But after 5 months, he forget that rule. When he sit in the piano, he play and play professionally without remembering what finger and what keyboard. The obedience that I teach you now is applied for you when you're still young. But when you reach the age of some age, you will do and you obey, not because it's the law, but because you think it's the right thing to do. Like a thank you, I say that. So now, if your parents, you see your parents, they do something you don't like them to do, they tell them, Mom, I don't like you, or Mom, Dad, I don't want you to do that. And if they keep doing that, two things can happen. Number 1, maybe you don't know why, and they may be right, because you have not seen everything yet. So maybe they have reason to do what you don't like them to do, right? Number 2, they can be wrong. But you find out they can be wrong 10 years later. Because by this time, just obey them. When you become 25, 35, you look back and I told you, Mom, don't move to Texas, California. It's expensive. You didn't listen to me. But by that time, what you know now is by your own experience. And if something came to you, you don't have to say, oh, either I listen or I don't listen. But by that time, you know by heart. So at your age, or when we're young, we can tell them what we don't like. Just tell them. But when they do, don't think that we know the answer. What about they know the answer too? So at this moment, because we don't know everything, let us respect them. But like I said, they might be wrong. But if they're wrong, they learn by their own mistake. Because if they listen to you, what about you wrong? Right? Good. Okay. Được chưa? Rồi. Còn câu hỏi nữa, một câu nữa thôi nha. Giờ là 9:03 hoặc 14 rồi.
What if your parents says something you know you shouldn't do, but they say something like, they say you do something bad, you know it's bad. Can you do it or?
Okay. If your parents tell you to do something and you know it's bad, then tell them. If deep down in your conscience that you know it's bad, definitely you can do that. I mean, this is a matter of conscience. Of course, as a kid, you know it too. Again, I'm not telling you about something about science and literature, something about scientific, but I'm talking about something related to virtues, true or not true, something like that. You have a right to tell parents, no, I can't do that. If they ask you, why don't we go and steal things because of our house have we don't have an air conditioner. There's a house there next door, they have an air conditioner. Tonight, go and just untie those screws and bring them home. You said, no, I can't do that. You can say that. Anything related to, here's the good thing about either young or old. Young or old, at about the age of reason, we're talking about 7 and 8. God puts in each one of us conscience, the inner voice. It helps you to make the distinction between right and wrong. So the age of reason, we call the age of reason, that means when you're only 7 or 8 years old, deep down in your heart, you know it's right or wrong. Of course, you don't know everything, but if that's the case, tell mom and dad, why do you think that I should not do? And of course, sometimes you're wrong, but they will explain to you. And if their explanation does not make any sense, then by your conscience, you can say, I cannot do that. I may go and ask the priest. Okay? Good question. Okay, so let us stand up and loving God, we come to Đại hội La Vang lần thứ 10. Cầu xin Đại La Vang cùng với gia đình, cho gia đình chúng con sống hòa thuận yêu thương nhau. Đặc biệt đối với con cái của chúng con, xin cho con cái của chúng con biết vâng lời, sống đức tin, luôn hướng về Chúa. Bởi vì cuối cùng chỉ có đức tin hướng dẫn cuộc đời của con cái chúng con. We pray for young people, obey their parents, adults, people in school, other places, simply because they're too young to know. But not only obey, pray for them to have a good and sensitive conscience, to know the difference between right and wrong when they listen to their peers, and pray that with obedience that they submit themselves to their parents and other adults, especially in the parish and in the church system, they will grow and be mature in God's eye. The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Go in peace. Thank you.